This episode 200 is dedicated to Jess Search, the visionary producer and organizer who died last year. We discuss two of her legacy projects that connect filmmakers around the world. I'm Thom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. Jess Search played a vital role to documentary makers on a global scale. She first made her mark as a commissioning editor at Channel 4 TV in the UK. She spent 5 years in that job, then left to create a documentary foundation, working with her life partner Beadie Finzi and other close collaborators on what became known as Doc Society. I first met Jess and her cohorts in 2006 and was immediately mesmerized by her passion and provocations. Jess was a student of philosophy and was quick to challenge received ideas about the status quo. She had a great talent for connecting people. In 2008, her team launched a live event called Good Pitch that reinvented how filmmakers met with funders. The old model of a pitch forum operated almost like a game show, with funders judging filmmakers in ways that could be demoralizing. Good Pitch created a sense of camaraderie, where funders and filmmakers were working towards a shared mission. One brilliant stroke of Good Pitch is that the event traveled around the globe, including Asia, Africa, and South America. Doc Society helped to foster connections across continents, so that a group like Docubox in Kenya could talk to Ambulante in Mexico. 7 of these organizations banded together and called themselves DISCO. That stands for Decentralized Independent Story and Cultural Organizers. Leave it to Jess and Doc Society to find an acronym that sounds like a party, DISCO. My last meeting with Jess was in March 2023 at the CPH Docs Festival in Copenhagen. Over dinner, she told me about DISCO's newest initiative called the Independence Project. She was growing alarmed that the space for independent media was shrinking all over the world. In some countries, the main threat was government control, in other places, corporate control. She was focused on a foundational philosophy. If we're going to defend independent media, we need to define what it means. I came away from that dinner feeling reinvigorated. But 4 months later, Jess made a shocking public announcement that she had a brain tumor. By the end of July, she was gone at age 54. Always the forward thinker, she had built structures to outlast her. Doc Society was organized with a flat power-sharing model between 6 women leaders. DISCO and the Independence Project would all carry on. Last month, I interviewed 2 key members of the DISCO Alliance. Jess's life partner, Beadie Finzi of Doc Society, spoke to me from her office in England, and Judy Kibinge of Kenya's Docubox spoke to me from Nairobi. I started by asking Judy to explain how DISCO came together.
I think as independent filmmakers, as founders of organizations, we're always all sort of looking for each other in a sense. We're always inspired by each other, and we're never really aware of just how similar we are and how similar problems are across regions, and how the battle that a Brazilian filmmaker or an Indonesian filmmaker might be having is just as close to my heart as here in Nairobi, Kenya. And so I think when we began to, DISCO took a while to form. It was a group of friends, and it's a little bit of a story, which I think we'd love to take you through, because it's been a growth of a group of friends. It's been a collaboration of a number of organizations rather than, I'd say, formal invitations. It's been something that just developed and grew, and the next thing we knew, we were like, what do we call this thing? I think that's a little closer to what it's been like.
Can you tell me a little bit more of that story, how that came to be?
Yeah, Beadie, how did we meet? Because I think it starts all the way back then, right?
Well, you and I met back in 2015, something like that.
Yep, 2015, I think it was, middle of the year.
Something like that. And, since then we've I mean, straight away, we started collaborating on a bunch of things, from individual films to building film funds to different kinds of field interventions like Good Pitch or the Climate Story Lab,
holding gatherings,
distribution experiments like Doc Academy,
visiting each other to really just see how did you work, and you guys coming over to see how we worked.
and definitely there were parties. I want to say that.
Yeah, definitely.
What are we saying? About 2019, we were both invited to a meeting of Build grantees and other cultural organizations at IDFA that was organized by Ford Foundation. So Build was the name of a particular program that Ford were running, and they brought together for the first time in person a group of international cultural organizations. I think the meeting was called something fairly serious like Sustaining Social Justice Documentary in Challenging Times. And that was in 2019, before things got real challenging. And we did some hard work together over 3 days. We talked about all kinds of systemic trends and challenges facing the film community. And as Judy says, just so struck by looking at each other and going, wow, the depth of experience, the similarity of challenges,
I remember thinking, honestly, Beadie, because when, and I guess it happens whatever country you're in, you kind of imagine that the experience that you're having is completely unique and the struggles that you're having are completely unique. And you're the only ones who aren't on every streamer and being paid $1 million. And so I just remember being in this space and thinking, wait a minute. You mean you're from Mexico and you feel the way I am feeling? And what do you mean you're in the UK and you guys are having the same issues as indie filmmakers as we are? So that meeting was really, really special because I feel like there were a lot of light bulbs going off amongst all the different people and groups there.
And that sense that some of the colleagues in the room had the answers, right? They'd already gone through experiences that others were walking into, and that maybe if we just had a little bit more time together, we could crack some stuff. It was tantalizing. Yeah. So I think you and I were charged with putting together like a Google group, which we did in early 2020. And then, of course, the pandemic strikes.
Dun, dun, dun. Just when we were like, we're going to be meeting all the time and, where next and what festival next, it was the pandemic. And I think, independent filmmaking was struck down as hard as any other industry by it and is separated as much. But thank God for Zoom, right?
We were literally meeting to say like, hey, how are you? Checking in, how are you doing? How is your organization, your network, facing down the challenges in your particular context? And, this was a tectonic moment in the field. And so it begins in solidarity. And then over the course of the next year, 2 years, it begins to turn into more future-facing conversations about what the field might look like when we got through this portal, this pandemic portal.
Yeah, and I remember actually quite a bit of it. I think it was scary for everyone. No one's seen anything like that before, and a lot of the early conversations just really being about how difficult the shutting down of cultural funds around the world and so on. But just as time unfolded, there's something about that solidarity of being able to jump on a call with people who are no longer organizations, but sort of faces that to just start imagining what real collaboration could look and feel like.
So as that developed and you started to think about what you could do with the strength of this knowledge group, what emerged from that?
Nothing was off the table. Nothing felt too ambitious or too specific or too visionary. Maybe that was the real gift of that time and the time we had together. We just had space to think and dream together, drawing on one another's experiences, the bitter and the sweet. And it sounds cute, but it was genuinely inspirational and transformational, as a space. The funding isn't working. How do we reimagine it? Distribution has collapsed. How do we reimagine it? Safety and security. How do we address this? Sustainability, the future of the independent artist. There was just the space and time to think together. And that I can't tell you that the gift that was,
And especially I think because, one thing that really, again, many things struck me, but one thing that really struck me as time developed is again, if you look at all the individual countries, you don't think of these as large amounts of money or huge numbers. Each feels separated, but as we came together, really begin to realize that we do have powerful numbers. You're looking at I think at some point we calculated and realized it was something like $7 million spent really between all these different organizations. It was really, I think, the realization that we can even start thinking about things like what universal basic income for filmmakers. Is that crazy? Maybe it is. Or should we think about perhaps defining what independence means? Okay, how will that help us? To figure out what if we have common understandings or definitions. Do we need to be speaking the same language, seeing as we all speak different languages? It was interesting times.
There was a beautiful trajectory from the space to imagine ideas, which began to turn into research projects, which began to turn into experiments and pilots, and then sort of finally, eventually this year, we came out and we released the Independence Project as some of the first bits of kind of public evidence of those efforts. But that was a kind of gorgeous kind of trajectory from thinking to writing and researching into pilot.
So I want to ask about the Independence Project in a minute. First, I want to get into, Judy, something that comes across when I look at the Docubox website and at other websites of Disco members, is the context that there's this long history of filmmakers from the global north making films about the global south. And now we see more filmmakers in the global south telling their own stories. And I'd love to hear what you think are the keys to strengthening that.
Docubox began about 10 years ago because as a filmmaker born in Nairobi, Kenya, working in Nairobi, Kenya, and as an adult making films in Nairobi, Kenya, it can be a very different experience because you're in a country just immersed in all these stories, but in many ways, we find as filmmakers, we might not have the same resources, and resources doesn't necessarily mean money. Resources could be 4 festivals, 4 documentary festivals in a city near you, and that sort of give you the opportunity to really immerse in films, not just from your country, but films from around the world. And so it becomes difficult when a filmmaker operates purely as an island and hasn't really been able to see work coming from fellow Africans or from fellow people of color or just from other countries with other techniques. And so I grew up very much seeing so many films about me. If there were ever documentary films that I did see, they were never done by people like me. It was always, the Maasai standing behind the 6 lions that are afraid of the Maasai, or it was about, the person who walked 25 million miles because they were all struck by malaria. And of course, things, malaria, climate, all these things, our wildlife, these are big, huge parts of what they are, but they're not everything we are. And so when you have a collective of filmmakers like the one that Docubox now sort of has grown around it, you find that you want to tell stories like the story of your grandmother. You want to be inspired by what she did, or you want to understand what it is to stand up and speak truth to power, not as a sort of senseless mob, but as perhaps a brave photographer that someone needs to follow and understand that as an African, he's having to choose as well between country and family. And so I think when when you see films that make you look foreign to yourself, it feels so powerful to start to see films where you say, yeah, that's me. That's me over there. And it's also even more empowering when you watch films like that here at home or even abroad and start to see the things that connect us as humans, the universal stories that connect us as humans that earlier many films made us feel excluded from. And when that happens, you start to kind of doubt your place. And so I just love the fact that we're making so many more films that not just reaffirm our place in the world, but just show such strength and such courage and such beauty in ways that haven't been seen because they weren't visible in the films that were coming out earlier about us.
Beadie, we've seen this growing movement in recent decades of more filmmakers in the global South wanting to make stories and making stories. But the funding and distribution system that's global still has most of its power centered in the global north. The philanthropists who are giving money, the distributors who are suggesting, oh, shape your story this way because it'll be more relatable to our audience. That is all still centered in the global north. And I know this is something that Disco thinks a lot about and thinks about how to change. And I wonder if you can share, what are the conversations that take place around this?
So yeah, there isn't a global marketplace, is there? There's a global north marketplace. So the entire, to your point, Tom, the entire media industrial complex is centered around Western, sort of American and European audiences, what they want, what they understand or don't understand. That's where the pots of money situated. That's where the curation is kind of defined by. So that is, in 2024, it's unbelievable, but it's absolutely true that if a independent filmmaker almost anywhere in the world wants to complete a kind of a beautifully ambitious feature documentary, they will have to go through those gatekeepers. And that has to end now. It should have ended 10, 20 years ago. It's unbelievable to be a quarter way through the century. And that's the system, that's the way in which we're organized. And we've dragged a kind of 20th century model of production and distribution of media into the 21st. And it's time, lovingly, gently, to put that down and to build something new, which centers plurality of perspectives, where resources are decentralized and located regionally. Where there isn't just one consumer who maybe speaks English and lives in the global north. This is the time for reimagination. And in some ways, perhaps there wasn't the space to have those conversations until the current system was so weak and so troubled, which I would argue it is now, that it is possible to say, okay, folks, we might not be looking at a patch up here. This might be actually the opportunity to remake something which is progressive and actually can meet the needs and wants of the 21st century, because dragging this on just makes no sense at all. And so we talk about this. I mean, this is the heart and soul of the conversations at Disco, which are around how do we reimagine models of both funding and distribution, which center plurality, which are distributed truly globally. How could we reanimate a truly global market? And if we think about the way in which, I don't want to call them consumers, I don't even want to call them audiences, the way citizens find stories, it's time to make it fit for purpose for the new technologies and the new screening technologies of this century. So that is an absolute priority for us, and we're beginning to have a few ideas about that and beginning to think about how we can pilot and test it.
I think as well, if I could add to that, it's really beautiful that organizations like Docubox, like Docu, and other Global South organizations exist, because there's a clear difference when, even as we raise a lot of the funding that we re-grant out, from the West. It's very, very different when a filmmaker receives their first $20,000 or $30,000 from home, from where they come from, because they arrive at markets and festivals with a completely different confidence. And I'll give you just very brief example of for instance, a filmmaker who had a story she wanted to tell, and the story changed in the middle, and it wasn't dramatic enough for the other funders. It wasn't, they'd seen something like that before, but we knew this is something very, very different. And so to have a fund stand by you and be like, hey, it doesn't matter if the West is not understanding what it is you're trying to say. We will find you another 20. We will hold your hand and keep moving with you. And this happened actually over and over again. Again, I remember another team that was really being held up against the wall by quite a powerful producer who threatened to take away a lot of the funds that they had put in their film because it wasn't humorous enough, and it wasn't a humorous topic. It was people in danger. It was but they wanted to add sort of some levity to it. And again, that film, which went on to win many awards and attend many festivals, it was just having a home fund and a home collective in Africa, in Kenya, in their country, in their region, standing by them, that allowed them to say, nah. And I think you can imagine how much stronger than a group like Disco becomes, because it's now the conversation has really even begun to move past this the story of purely Western commissioners or Western decision makers, because we can see from each other that this works. Yeah, but we've got to raise that money, and I think if we can do it collectively, it really is bringing the world something it's never seen. And I think once people see more and more of the films coming out, I think it'll become easier to raise the sort of funds that we need to really transform storytelling and make it truly global.
So, Beadie, I want to ask about the Independence Project. And I mean, to frame this, I have to bring up Jess Search, your longtime partner in Doc Society, your life partner, who passed away last year. And the last time I got to spend time with Jess at CPH Docs in 2023, March 2023, she was talking about the Independence Project and talking about this need that she had recognized through the conversations at Disco to define what independence in documentary filmmaking means. And I have to admit, when she was having this conversation with me, I didn't get it. I was surprised that this was the place that she was identifying as, as a top priority. And I've spent the last year trying to absorb the scope of what this is. So, I mean, can you kind of set up, where this came from, and what the Independence Project is?
So even after our first sort of in-person meeting, and a series of priorities were naturally evolving out of the conversations at Disco, areas that we really wanted to focus our attention on, whether it be sustainability of filmmakers, pooled production funds, different kinds of solutions for the distribution kind of quagmire. The Independence Project, I think Jess saw this as a kind of fundamental, like it needed to come underneath everything else. It was almost like a base stone, a lodestone. And she believed that we needed, Disco needed to aid and abet to encourage a groundswell of conversations amongst documentary filmmakers in every region, at a time when public interest media is in jeopardy from market forces, from big tech, from political pressures. That sense that we needed to organize and revitalize, to reclaim an identity to name it, to describe this practice of independent filmmaking and why it matters. Because only then, only if we had that within us, both as practitioners, as cultural organisers, would we be able to make the case for the resources and the platforms that this field needs and deserves. That was her belief. And she saw it as a campaign, a multi-pronged campaign, and that in a way the Independence Project was the beginning of the practitioner-led conversation. And that there would be other conversations happening in different, amongst different groups. She had an idea for a kind of a campaign that might help, a specific part of the campaign that might help make adjustments in the marketplace as well. But this was the launch and where she believed it should begin, if you like, in the grassroots, in the field, with makers who are tired and beleaguered, in some cases frightened, despairing. What is this? What does it really mean? Does anyone value what we do? Does it matter anyway? And this was like, no. Let's begin again. And so that was the sort of incept of the audacity of that project. Let's begin a conversation amongst global makers to describe and define this practice, what it means, and what it means in the context of our societies, not just as individual makers. And slowly, gently this year, these conversations have started to ripple out. We produced a manuscript which anyone anywhere in the world can take and download and then use. The idea is that you just use it to have readings together, literally out loud, sit together in your community and hear verbatim the words of your brothers and sisters in different contexts describe this work and use it as a springboard for a conversation. It's as simple as that. And we're just so happy this has begun to quietly spread, from first in CPH this year. We're very grateful to them to let us launch there. But then it went to IDA. It's been in the UK. It's been in Hong Kong. It's just beginning to kind of migrate beautifully. But that's an invitation for anyone, for any group, any network, any cultural organisation, any group of filmmakers. Just take it, download it, and begin to talk about it, to write, to listen to one another and talk about this and what it means for you. This is where we think it all begins.
So, Judy, what has the Independence Project meant to you?
It's meant many things. Hey, but Thom, I have to agree with you. Honestly, it's same. When Jess first mentioned it, I was like, huh? But she was so thrilled. She was so committed to it. And it took me a while to really understand that actually definitions mean a lot, because you can walk around with the idea you have in your head of what independence is. And you realize that by not defining it, you allow so many things to continue to exist in this state of assumptions. For many people right now, with streamers being what they are, independent documentary is celebrity, it's sports, it's crime. And more people are watching that and defining that to be independent film. But when you take 50 makers from over 30 countries, I think it was 34 countries if I'm not mistaken, and begin to probe and listen to what that word may mean to them. For instance, in Kenya, many filmmakers will say, what does that mean? That's a very Western term, because in our countries, everyone is an independent filmmaker. We don't have big studio filmmakers. We don't have, massive broadcasters that pay hundreds of thousands of pounds or euros. So all of us are independent filmmakers. And in just the power of being able to describe what it means to us, it brings a clarity and it defines a problem that otherwise sounds like it doesn't exist. An indie is an indie, and you go through that manuscript and you realize, oh dang, wait a minute, I my head is filled with assumptions, and there is a problem, and we do need to get together and figure out just a new way, a new dispensation, a new way of defining that thing that we believe to be independence.
When you read through the responses collected in this initial dialogue from the Independence Project, what are things that stand out to you as something that comes as a surprise or something that you feel is being articulated that need to be reinforced?
There were so many things. I mean, I remember, for instance, a line that an Arabic filmmaker said. You know, we talk about Arab film, and there was an Arabic filmmaker saying how that expression in itself, Arabic film, was problematic because it stereotyped them. And it was only by really reading through and seeing their reasoning of why they felt stereotyped and what it took, the number of festivals that they went through to realize, why things were being boxed in certain ways. I think, because I'd have never thought about that. I'd have never thought about Arab filmmakers finding that problematic. Another filmmaker from, I think, Central Africa, again, was really talking about what it means to author one's own story. And again, it sounds simple, but when you hear it being described by a filmmaker coming from a continent that very stereotypically people think of DRC and they think of minerals, or they think of conflict, and they think of, without even being biased, all the images they've seen rush at them. And you read the words of this storyteller and you see their situation afresh and understand, oh, so that is why we do need authors from DRC to define who they are, because even I had a bias and an assumption of what I thought stories from that area were. And I think it's words like that make you by yourself realize that, hang on, so who has been authoring these stories? So I think there's something about the rhythm of reading one account of someone's perspective of independence followed by another person's that really starts to give you a much bigger picture of it all.
Beadie, what are some of the learnings you've taken from this project?
It was incredibly moving. I found the readings that I've witnessed just incredibly moving. And it's not an easy listen, by the way. That's really important. There's conflict, there's admonishment, there's sadness in these words. It's not an easy read, but for me, for us at Doc Society, I have to say, it's really given us a massive it's almost like we retook our marriage vows to one another and to the field. And, we wrote, we reaffirmed our vow, which is an unapologetic vow, which is Doc Society backs independence. We back storytelling by those artists, those journalists, those filmmakers who have creative and editorial control. They are not dictated to by governments, by corporate interests, by algorithms. That is what we stand for. That is what we stand by. And we are absolutely sure that preserving space, resources, distribution for those narratives are what is going to be essential to societies. And so somehow actually the process of this and of the listening and the reflection has been hugely kind of edifying and restorative and challenging and clarifying for Doc Society in this moment, given all the tectonic pressures on the field. We know who we stand for and who we stand by. And all of those artists and filmmakers have, refocused, recentered our kind of hearts in this moment and our determination, actually. So I'm very grateful.
I think something that came through for me, maybe collectively, which kind of is cause for celebration as well, was the affirmation that it's, whether it was some filmmakers declaring we've never had the luxury of being anything but independent, and then others are, sort of looking at it and saying, actually, independence to me is taking full responsibility and being able to have final cut, for instance. I think in reading all of that, it just reminded us very, very strongly about what it exactly is we need to fight for. And because sometimes you forget that it is a thing. It is a luxury to be able to finish a film independently. You forget, you're dull. The words don't mean what they should. They don't have the weights and meanings they should. So it really became a celebration of self rule, maybe, as it were, maybe self rule, or self yeah, having the buck stop with you as a storyteller in a world that needs these powerful stories to come out, even though it is so much more difficult to make them independently.
So the Independence Project went through a phase of collecting these testimonies. Now you're in a phase of sharing these testimonies. And what do you see as future steps?
Well, I think that, there is oodles more to be explored in the manuscripts, and the idea is to, over the course of this year and next year, to begin to publish different volumes that address different questions, so that we keep injecting into the dialogue, into the conversation happening at festivals, markets, and all these places, a broader, a more kind of pluralistic narrative about some of the things that ail us and some of the things that we'd like to do differently. So, whether that's around questions of sustainability or funding models, the future of public and corporate distribution, with film festivals, there are loads of different topics here which we can kind of aggregate and then share back, with the hope that it creates more complex and nourishing conversations. Actually, that's the kind of plan for the next sort of 12 months or so. But meanwhile, the Independence Project as an idea is sort of as a campaign, if you will, because it's part of a kind of larger strategy, which is to reframe and reignite, to reignite the imagination around what the contribution of these artists, these storytellers are. And I think we have a job to do here, because I don't need to tell you, Thom, about the state, of our information ecosystem, of the kind of tectonic forces bearing down upon it, whether that be from big tech, whether that be political pressures, whether that be, pressures on public service broadcasters. If there's going to be a media in the public interest in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, our bet, Disco's bet, is about trying to encourage now a re-understanding of independent filmmakers at the very roots of public interest media. They stand alongside their cousins in journalism, and they are the roots, they are the source. You feed them, you equip them, their ideas, their perspectives radiate up through public media, community media, corporate media. But that's the investment that must be made. And so I think there's a piece of kind of advocacy which we're going to be stepping into collectively, which is making the case for this work and the role of these artists and storytellers within the whole firmament of public interest media, and encouraging the kind of seismic levels of investment and reimagining how to do that and how that could look like. And frankly, we're looking at our cousins in journalism. Arguably they're 10 years ahead in a collapse. And we're watching how funders and governments and other communities have kind of now trying to start to rally around, because they've understood what happens when when you end up with news deserts, when information dries up, the toxicity that can lead to, and the vulnerability that can lead to. So we're looking hard at our cousins in journalism, thinking to ourselves, are there some answers there in the way they've organised? Are there some answers there in the way the new funding mechanisms are emerging globally, regionally? And there's a question about how far, as if we think of ourselves more broadly as part of this ecosystem of media in the public interest, how will our fortunes be conjoined in 5 years, 10 years' time, both in funding models, in the platforms that folks access the work? I think there's some really juicy questions to get into, and that's what Disco is excited to think about and to begin to socialize and seed.
So, Judy, I want to ask you about there's a long history in filmmaking of hierarchy where authority flows from a director or a producer, and and I think there's a lot of rethinking of that going on, and even the collaborative structure of Disco, or the collaborative structure of that animates a lot of Doc Society's projects is part of that rethinking. And I wonder what you've learned from the process of, I don't know what you want to call it, democratizing decision making or collective decision making, or however you define it.
I think in a strange way, because we've always been outside the system of huge money, of Paramount, studio money, it was built in a certain way. It if anything, where these sort of larger films began is where the lack of democracy began, believe it or not, I think. Because you would have these large studios or broadcasters really laying down how it went and dictating how it would work, and dictating also to cinemas what they would screen and how the films would be bundled, all the way till independent distributors had to go to the Supreme Court, I think, to reverse that. It's very interesting that coming from this part of the world, we haven't experienced that. We've always had to self-organize. We've always had to collaborate. We've always had to figure out. We have a thing called Harambe, which means, you all put your money together. We've always had to kind of make films like that. I think what I have learned is not really about the sort of democratization of ideas, or actually, I think maybe others have learned from us, to be honest, as well. But what I have learned and what I have taken such heart and inspiration from is it doesn't have to just be individuals collaborating. If you have organizations with members or founders or who have similar values, you are then able to influence and support and transform thousands of the world for thousands of filmmakers across the globe that were outside that door. I think that's been a great learning to me, and especially I think from 10 years ago or 12 years ago, when actually I didn't even know how films got funded in the West. I didn't realize there was a place called IDFA where people sat on a long table and each said, I'll give you 20,000, I'll give you 80,000. That to me was kind of mind blowing, because that was more about power and money concentrated in a room where they could afford to say that. And that was really astonishing for me. But I think this feels more like we're back in the village, to be honest. And I think we all came from villages of a kind. And this feels very organic and very true. And it feels a little bit more like how the world should be, as opposed to how it is becoming, the same idea of massive forces dictating, I will only take Scorsese in this, and that's how you get onto Netflix, or I will only have these 5 very influential documentary filmmakers and they can do their series about the last criminal who killed 20 women in a town in Missouri or whatever. That feels to me like such a lack of democracy, and it feels like we've been living in a place with democracy but no money. And so I'm really hoping that disco and the very kind of gathering of similar values is going to unlock just a new world, or take us back to how things should be in a world where independence and democracy truly exist in a really true way.
want to thank Beadie Finzi and Judy Kibinge for speaking with me. You can see our show notes to learn more about Doc Society, Docubox, Disco, and the Independence Project. This episode 200 is dedicated to the legacy of Jess Search. We have a newsletter called Doc Voices, written by Anisha Javeri. You can find it by searching on Substack for Pure Nonfiction. If you want to advertise to our 40,000 readers, send an email to listen@purenonfiction.net. Thanks to our team, series producer Hannah Nordenswan, partnership manager Bella Racklin, and web designer Cross Strategy. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Raphaela Nehausen. I'm Thom Powers. Follow us on Instagram and visit our website at purenonfiction.net.